What's going on, everyone? It is our weekly Zoom hangout. Also, it's the My Aggie Nation podcast. So thank you for watching. I'm Travis Brown with the Eagle over there, Alex Miller and Robert Cessna of the Eagle. And I'll pitch it to Alex to introduce our guest for this week. Alex?
Yeah, joining us this week, we got Ben Portnoy. He's from the state newspaper in Columbia, South Carolina. He covers the Gamecocks football team, the Aggies, of course, hosting South Carolina this Saturday at Kyle Field. Ben, how are you doing?
I'm good, guys. Appreciate you guys having me. Excited to get down to College Station this weekend. Should be a good time.
Yeah, Ben, first question, what's kind of the big storyline going into this game on the South Carolina side of things? It seems like quarterback might be the big one.
Yeah, I was going to say, starting about an hour ago, we found out that we're going to have a quarterback change. But no, Shane Beamer had said on his Sunday teleconference that Zeb Noland was going to be the starter going into this week. And then about, I guess, an hour and a half ago, said that Luke Doty will be out for the season. So it's Zeb Noland's show for the rest of the way, at least barring something crazy or unforeseen or anything like that. But yeah, it's been a little bit of a wild week, and we're only into Tuesday, so Lord knows what we've got the rest of the way. But no, it's going to be an interesting it's an interesting matchup. I think that Zeb Noland's played a couple of games. We haven't really seen him in SEC play. Got hurt 5 minutes into the Georgia game, had his hand stepped on. We hadn't seen him from there. It was Luke Doty's show from that point on. Luke's now aggravated his foot that held him out for the first couple of games of the year. He's done for the year. So now it's Zeb Noland's go at it. It feels like he's been playing college football probably since A&M was in the Big 12. But, sixth year, he's going at it again. And, one of the crazier stories in college football gets a little bit crazier.
If you wouldn't mind, run us through what's the differences between the two quarterbacks. I know we'll see the one, but what might A&M expect as opposed to what they've been rolling out there the last couple of weeks?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing that you get with Luke Doty that you don't get with Zeb Noland is that Luke's a true running threat. I mean, Luke's an athletic guy. He's a guy who played some receiver last year for South Carolina when the quarterback, room was pretty settled. Ended up playing a little bit of quarterback as well. I mean, played some receiver early in his high school career. He was, one of the higher rated dual threat guys in the class of 2020. He was a top 100 recruit. I mean, he's that kind of athlete. He's a, top tier athlete. Whereas Zeb, I think you get more arm strength, can push the ball, is a little bit more accurate, probably downfield, hitting on deep throws. I think that's more his MO. He's going to be a little bit more of a field, general, I guess, for lack of a better term. He controls the offense. He knows it kind of inside and out. And I think that he's a guy that can really kind of keep things in check. He's not going to make a lot of mistakes, largely hits guys in the hands when he needs to. And, the completion percentage isn't quite there, but some of that's come with drops. I mean, he had, 4 or 5 drops in the East Carolina game that have kind of skewed his numbers a little bit. So things like that. But I think those are the two biggest things. I think that Zeb Noland's more of a true pocket passer, whereas Luke is a guy that can move around and makes you think a little bit more in the running game.
Since the offense has really, on the outside looking in, struggled so much, is it that big of a deal that they have to change quarterbacks, or it's still they need other people to step up for this team to be successful on offense?
Yeah, I think you're right, Robert. I mean, I think that for all intents and purposes, it doesn't make that much of a difference. I mean, South Carolina has had problems on offense most of the year. And I think that, theoretically, you'd like to have Luke Doty as the guy. I mean, you feel like he's the highest ceiling guy. I think that Zeb Noland is kind of high floor, low ceiling, if you had to put it that way. But, as far as South Carolina's offense has gone, it just hasn't really clicked. Like, you've seen it in spurts. They've hit some big plays. They hit a couple of big plays against Vanderbilt, but, so is everyone else in the country. It's just not – it's one of those things is like you've seen it a couple of times. You've seen them string together a drive here or there, but you haven't seen them sustain it for a whole game. And I think it's something that is, frankly annoyed South Carolina fans up and down. And I think it's something that I think bothers people around here, makes people question whether there needs to be an offensive coordinator change and all of those things. And it doesn't help when you look not that far down the road where Tennessee's lighting up the scoreboard in year one under a new coach. Auburn's doing things that, they haven't been able to do offensively under a new coach. And, we can talk all we want about, being a first-year head coach and the growing pains that come with that. And that's fair to some degree, but, and every program's a little bit different. But, that's something that I think South Carolina fans have been mostly frustrated with, is that, it's an offense that just hasn't really gotten there, even against the teams that, it should have gotten there against. And I think that's been the biggest frustration, regardless of who's quarterback or not.
And
Does it make for a little bit of an interesting dichotomy with an offense that's struggling so much, but a defense that seems to be forcing a lot of turnovers? And usually when you win the turnover battles, that will enable you to win some ball game.
Yeah, definitely. No, it's a good point. I mean, South Carolina's defense has been really, really good this year. I mean, they've given up some big plays. They got torched in the first quarter against Tennessee, but pretty much held down the fort the rest of the way. I think they gave up, just about 400 yards in the first half against Tennessee. And most of that came in the first quarter, and they were down 28-0 by the time you could snap your fingers. But, once that got slowed down, I think Tennessee had like 9 yards passing in the second half. I mean, it's a group that adjusted. RJ Roderick, who's the starting safety, was out for the first half after a targeting penalty, and that made a big difference. But yeah, like you mentioned, I mean, this is a team that's won the turnover battle, if I'm not mistaken, in 4 out of their 7 games, or 5 out of the 7 games. I mean, just about 3/4 of the games that they've played, they've won the turnover battle. And, that's been the biggest problem, is that the offense just hasn't been able to cash in on short fields. You saw it against Vanderbilt last week. South Carolina had an interception, returned it to the Vanderbilt, I think 23, drive stalled out at like the 13 on a failed 4th down conversion attempt. So, it's things like that where you feel like South Carolina is being given, short fields, being given good opportunities by a defense that's played, way above its weight class, frankly, for a group that, coming in, we kind of thought, okay, South Carolina's got all these running backs. They've got a bunch of guys coming back on the offensive line. You've got over 100 appearances between the guys that are starting on the offensive line. And, you feel pretty good about that group being all right. You've got a bunch of running backs. You feel like they're going to be able to run the ball. The defense is going to be the problem. Well, 7 games in, the defense has been great. Maybe not the best in the SEC, but it's been, right in the middle of the pack and way ahead of where we thought it was going to be. And, the offense just hasn't gotten there. So it's been an interesting dichotomy, and, I'm sure creates some frustration if you're a defensive guy that, the defense is playing well enough to win you games and keep you in games, and the offense just hasn't been there.
Yeah, I was going to say, when you look at the defensive numbers, man, it's so impressive. So when you play someone like Kentucky and Georgia, does the fact that the offense is so bad, do they eventually wear down in the second half? Because when you look at A&M, I mean, obviously A&M's got a great defense. That's their forte. So it might be the deal where that defense will be out on the field a lot. Has that happened where they just seem to be take too many snaps?
I think that's fair. I mean, the biggest problem is just that the offense hasn't been able to sustain drives. Like, the Kentucky game, for example, is a good example. South Carolina came out of the gate and went on a 75-yard touchdown drive on the first drive of the second half, made that a 1-score game, or pulled within 10 points, I think, at the time, gave themselves a chance to get back in that game. And then they stalled out the rest of the half and didn't score another point the rest, stalled out, got a field goal late to pull it within 6, but, didn't really do enough to keep them on the field and let Kentucky control the game. And like, if you look at that game, you look at the opportunities that the defense gave it, had a couple of interceptions, won the turnover battle by a pretty decent margin in that game too. Like, that's a game that you're looking back. South Carolina, if they, click even just a little bit better, probably wins that football game. And Kentucky's, ranked, probably 23, 24, 25, as opposed to in the top 15 going into last week. So I think that, like you said, I think that the South Carolina defense has had to be on the field a little bit longer than it probably should, just because the offense hasn't been able to sustain drives. And, against an A&M defense that, has got guys that can get to the pass rusher, can stop the run. I mean, it's it's just a really bad matchup if you're South Carolina.
With how's the health with the team? What's the injury situation, and how did they come in that regard to Kyle Field?
Yeah, it's a group that's, as Shane Beamer said, we're just pretty banged up right now. I think that it's a group that, has dealt with some bumps and bruises. Luke Doty's the biggest one to keep in mind. Kevin Harris was dinged up a little bit in the last game. We're not really sure how healthy he is. And frankly, we haven't really gotten a great read on how healthy he's been all year. He had an offseason back procedure that held him out for the first game. Shane Beamer said he had dealt with an undisclosed illness for a little while. So he's been kind of in and out, just hasn't quite gotten the number of carries that probably South Carolina would have liked out of him. Jalen Dickerson's a guy that's iffy, I believe is what Shane Beamer said today, as far as guys who could, not be able to play next week. Dylan Wanham, starting tackle, is also iffy this week. So we'll see whether those guys can play. South Carolina's rotated a lot of guys on the offensive line. So, if you don't see Dylan Wanham, you'll see some other guys. You'll probably see some rotation there. South Carolina has made a pretty conscious effort to try and mix things up on an offensive line that's just been kind of mediocre all year. And I think that, you'll see that again this week.
Hey, Ben, I'm kind of interested when you go back to SEC media days, and I always have to laugh because, first year coaches are always the sky's the limit. But I really thought Beamer was really pumped up, and he talked about the fan base and all that. It was very impressive. And I know he's got the lineage. His dad came here and won at Kyle Field. I can remember when he came here. So you hold a little bit of credence to what he says, and they have been, competitive with the defense. But I wonder, from your perspective, when I look, they won that game last week, but they're going to be heavy underdogs probably the rest of the way. They might not win another game. So I just wonder, the psyche of the program. It might be that they need to play well for moral victories, but when you look at that, what's your expectations for this team the rest of the year? I guess that's the bottom line.
Yeah, when you look at it the rest of the way, South Carolina's got A&M this week. They've got Florida after the bye week. You've still got Missouri, but you also got to play Auburn and Clemson in your last 5 games. Like, Missouri's maybe the one game where you feel like they might have a chance, but still a long road trip. And, Missouri's been bad, but Missouri's still scoring points. And I'm not convinced that South Carolina can score more than 20 or 25 points in a game. And, that's the kind of game you probably need to score 35 to win. So, I think that that's the biggest thing is, like, when you look at this schedule, South Carolina may not win another game the rest of the year. And that's a pretty, I think that's a pretty standard thought around here is that, this good thing could get bad quickly. But that said, you look at this is a team that won 2 games last year. Now, granted, that was in, only SEC play, but it's a team that won 2 games last year. It's a team that won 4 games the year before, and just has been kind of down the last few years and is still kind of trying to, I guess for lack of a better term, recapture what they had under Spurrier, right? And I think that if you're South Carolina, like, 4 wins is progress. Like, this team was not going to be a team that goes and wins 9 games in year 1. Maybe not even gets to a bowl game in year 1. I've joked with some people around here is that, if this team gets to a bowl game, given what the hand they were dealt, what they had to piece together, the offense, how it's been, if this team gets to 6 wins, like, there's a legitimate argument that Shane Beamer ought to be in the coach of the year running for the SEC. It was, a problem coming in, and they had to fix a lot of holes. You've sitting at 4 wins. There's a couple of games on this schedule where you think, okay, maybe there's a puncher's chance. Look, just about every team that South Carolina plays the rest of the way, they're going to be undermanned and, frankly, out-talented pretty much against everyone they line up against, I guess, maybe except Missouri. But, are there games on the schedule that you think maybe, yeah, Florida hasn't been great. Maybe you get that game at home. You play an Auburn team that, frankly, I think isn't as good as the team that South Carolina beat last year. So, like, weird things happen. South Carolina gets a couple of home games. Can they go and upset Clemson? Clemson's been speaking of anemic offenses, there's another one, right? Like, I'm not saying that South Carolina's going to go win that game. Realistically, Clemson probably still wins by a couple of touchdowns, but you can talk yourself into it. But I think like you said, like, there's a pretty good chance that South Carolina doesn't win another game the rest of the year. But on the flip side of that, they've won every game they should have won this year. They beat Vanderbilt, they beat Eastern Carolina, they beat Troy, they beat Eastern Illinois. Like, they've largely avoided disaster. Now, they've come as close as humanly possible when you look at, last week's win over Vanderbilt and needing the final drive to go win that game. But South Carolina has won the games they should have won. And for a program like this, when you're in building and you're, dealing with a frustrated fan base and everything that goes into it, they've kind of done what they needed to do right now. If you told Shane Beamer at the beginning of the year at SEC Media Days that South Carolina would be above 500 heading into, like, the end of October, I think he'd pretty much take that, every day of the week and twice on Sunday.
And we tweeted about it on Sunday, you and I, but the Bonham Trophy, I feel like it's something that we have to talk about every year when A&M and South Carolina play each other. What have you learned about it? And just the interesting aspect of this rivalry that the 2 cross-division rivals have.
Yeah, I got to say that Shane Beamer alerted me to that this was actually a rivalry trophy game. I had no clue. So, being here for 6 months, I thought I would have picked that up, but that's a new one for me. It's a cool trophy. That's cool. They keep it at the Alamo. Is that right? So it's cool.
Who really knows?
Yeah, no one really knows where it is.
Travis's house.
Yeah, I was tweeting about it and looking around for it, and fans were like, "Well, yeah, no one here knows what it is because South Carolina's never won it. It's never been to Columbia, so I guess there's some merit to that." But it's kind of a bizarre thing. But hey, I went to a Big Ten school. I grew up with Big Ten football, so I'm always here for a weird rivalry trophy.
Yeah, for those watching who don't know, there is a trophy for this game. It's called the James Bonham Trophy. Of course, the famous Alamo hero who was from San Antonio, from South Carolina, came and fought and died in the Alamo. And it was commissioned right when A&M came into the SEC. But it's meant to be a a governor's trophy, I think is what they called it. It's not like they take it on the field and run it across the field and like poke someone's eye out with it. It's that they are supposed to it's supposed to go into the state capitol for a week of the winning team each year. I don't think that's happened. And as far as we know from like 4 years ago, it's stored in the Alamo. So right next to Pee Wee Herman. So anyway, Cease, you got anything else?
Yeah, I was reading this weekend. I found out, he was the first guy to enter the transfer portal. He did not like the way things were going at his Army, so he decided to switch sides.
That's a good joke. I appreciate that joke. Anyway, we'll end on that. Ben, before we go, would you let everyone know the best way to get a hold of you, find your stuff, and read your stuff heading up into the game?
Yeah, definitely. You can catch me on Twitter at bportnoy15 or on thestate.com. So not too hard to find if you give it a quick Google search.
Easier to find than the Bonham Trophy. Ben, thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you next week. See you at the end of this week. And thanks for everyone to watching this and listening to the My Aggie Nation podcast. For Alex Miller, Robert Cessna, I'm Travis Brown. Thanks so much.